Order the Finance Committee meeting Monday, August 10th, 2020. We'll ask staff to keep themselves muted as I unmute everyone and ask Laura to call the roll.
Alder Carter? Alder Carter, I think you're on mute.
Present.
Alder Furman?
Present.
Alder Furman's here. Alder Kimball?
Here.
Alder Kimball's here. Alder Harrington McKinney? Alder Harrington McKinney? Alder Moreland?
Here.
Alder Revere?
Here.
Mayor Rhodes Conway?
Present.
Alder Harrington McKinney?
Present.
Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. All right, can we have the meeting instructions, please?
Great. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, please activate your video when you're speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will be muted until called upon, and the clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right. We'll start with if there are any disclosures or recusals on any items on our agenda. Seeing none, we will go then to the consent agenda. We have registrants or requests already on items 14, 17, and then 24 and 25. Are there any additional items that members would like to have excluded from the consent agenda? All right, seeing none. Alder Moreland, go ahead.
Okay, I would like item 7 excluded.
Okay, item 7. Thank you, Alder. And Alder Revere.
Thank you, Mayor. In addition to agenda item 7, I also have a question or two about agenda items 15 and 16, please.
15 and 16. All right. Thank you, Alder. Any other items that alders would like to request separation on? Okay. Then seeing none, I will just bring to your attention that we do have a number of registrants on items 20 through 23. And I believe that that list has been made available to you. So just none of those folks wished to speak, but some were available to answer questions. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions for any of the registrants on any of the items that will remain on the consent agenda. All right. right, seeing none, then just one more time, the items excluded from the consent agenda are 7, 14, 15, 16, 17, 24, and 25. And then on the consent agenda, Alder Carter for a motion.
I move the consent agenda for adoption.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney, a second.
Second.
All right, the consent agenda has been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of the items on the consent agenda with their recommendations? Alder Moreland?
Now, I don't know whether I should have removed this from the consent agenda, but I want to notice my opposition of item 17.
Alder Moreland will be noted as voting against item 17. Is there any other? Alder Furman?
I just wanted to clarify. I believe 17 was removed.
Yep, 17 is off the consent agenda, Alder.
Oh.
So you'll get to vote against it then.
Okay.
Is there any other objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, then we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of the items on the consent agenda and their various recommendations. And we will come to item number 7, which is Legistar 61550, authorizing a property management agreement with Madison Property Management, Inc. for 1810 South Park Street. And let's start, Alder Carter, with a motion.
Yes, move adoption for item 7, 61550.
Alder Harrington McKinney, would you second?
Second.
Thank you, Alders. Alder Moreland, questions for staff?
Yes, we received at least one, but I've heard, I guess kind of anecdotally, that this property management company does not have the best reputation. And I guess I just wanted to see if staff or someone could address that.
Let's see if Mr. Rolfs or Mr. Mikolajewski would like to address that.
I can start, and then if Mr. Rolfs would like to jump in, he certainly can. 1810 South Park Street is a property that the city is in the process of purchasing. And in fact, the TID amendments that were on your agenda this evening would provide the financial support to go forward with that property. We are purchasing the property from the gentleman that owns the company that we're going to be contracting with to manage it. Basically, he's already managing this property. Our intent in the long term is to likely redevelop this property. But in the meantime, given that this firm already has a relationship with those existing tenants, the thought is to continue that relationship from a property management standpoint, even though the city is the owner, for the next couple of years. And again, at some point in the future, we will likely be doing something different with the property. And at that time, that property management would no longer be needed. So basically, this is sort of an interim step to continue the management that's already been occurring on the site.
Okay. Have you heard any negative commentary about this property management group?
This property management group manages a significant amount of property throughout the community. I've been with the city for 13 years now, and certainly over that time, I have heard individuals express displeasure with the firm. But that being said, I'm sure there's also individuals out there that are happy with the firm. Again, it's a very large firm that owns and manages a significant amount of property throughout the community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some more questions of staff. So I was aware when I did read the packet and put two and two together and figured out that Jim Stoppel, obviously, as you already articulated, Matt is the owner of MPM and also was the party that we've negotiated the sale of this property on South Park Street with. Can I ask first, was the ongoing management of the property subject of our negotiations with Mr. Stoppel?
No, it was not.
So that was never discussed at all?
It might have been discussed, but our purchase of the property from Mr. Stoppel is in no way contingent upon his continuing to manage the property. If we were to decide to hire someone else to manage it, he would still move forward with the sale.
And are you aware, has the city engaged with MPM for their management services either in the past or currently on other properties?
I don't know. I'm looking to Mr. Rolfs if he is aware of anything.
To the best of my recollection, Alder, I do not recall working with MPM for the management of other city properties. As Mr. Mikolajewski stated earlier, because we're buying the property from Mr. Stoppel, the owner of MPM, we felt it would be a reasonable jump to have him continue managing the property in this interim period.
And could either of you or Mr. Wachter explain, has the city in the past used an RFP process for property management services? I'm aware that we've used other property management companies in the city for other properties that we currently hold or have held in the past, like the Villager and properties on Lake Point Drive, for example. Have we used RFP processes for other property management services for those or other properties held or previously held by the city?
I believe we have in the past in some situations.
And I see Mr. Wachter, Mayor, also wishes to respond. His hand is raised.
So yes, we use RFPs to find property managers, like you said, for Village on Park. But we've also had the case where we've purchased property and continued using the existing property manager for the short interim period. Mr. Rolfs and I negotiated that with a property on 7941 Tree Lane. We kept the existing property manager because they knew the tenants, but they also knew the buildings, and they already had like the landscape contracts, so it gave efficiencies. So I'd say when we do long-term property management, we would definitely go to RFP for the longer-term properties.
And do you recall, Matt, in the past RFP process or processes, was that for general city services for property management, or were those tailored to specific subject parcels?
I believe it's usually for specific parcels. And honestly, if we're going to be owning something in the long term, it's usually not the city, it's the CDA is the one who does a lot more of long-term property management contracts for their properties.
Right, which is one of the reasons why I was asking if you wanted to jump in and add anything besides your previous role as manager of the real estate section. Okay. Well, thank you all for your responses. Thank you, Mayor. That's all the questions I have now.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. Alder Revere asked a bunch of my questions, so I've got a few less. When we say temporary, how long do we think we're going to have this building? Do we have any idea? Is it 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years? I mean, do we have a rough idea?
I mean, I'd say that it's not going to be months. It's going to be in the years. Right now, we're still finishing the South Madison plan, and really, on its own, this property probably has some limited redevelopment possibility. So it's partially dependent on what happens in sort of the broader area. And I don't know, Matt or Dan, if you have other thoughts, but it's certainly over 1 year.
I think that accurately sums it up.
Okay, and it looks like there's a 120-day out written notice that we can get out of this contract. I would, yeah, I mean, I guess, yes, that would be my questions for now. I'll make more comments later. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
Thank you. This is for either one of the Matts. How many commercial properties do we own as of today?
We being the city, not the CDA?
Either one.
I'd say about a half dozen.
Okay. And this is commercial property, correct?
Yes.
And how many property management companies? I know that MPM is super large, but for commercial properties that we own, how many management companies are exclusive to commercial property? Because that's a little bit different than residential.
I mean, there are, of kind of the half dozen of commercial properties that I can think of off the top of my head that we own, each of them probably has a different manager of those that we have a third-party manager.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is the alder present?
Which alder?
The alder that this property lands in?
I believe that's Alder Carter.
So, is that?
Yes, yeah.
Alder Carter, excuse me, because I thought it was attached to another alder. Have you had any complaints or concerns about this management company historically, our connection with them?
I haven't had any complaints regarding the commercial property. I've had complaints regarding residential property. That's why I wanted to know how many management companies were exclusive to commercial.
And a follow-up question, you've had some complaints related to residential. Does that carry over to this property manager working positively or negatively with tenants? I mean, is there any association there? I mean, how negative are these complaints?
I don't think it overflows. I think the expectations between commercial and residential are a little bit different. But I do believe that once we purchase the property and get involved with the tenants a little bit more, we might hear more. We might receive more information, let me put it that way, from the tenants.
Okay. And so approving this today does not negate us coming back and taking a serious look at how this management company is treating residents. Is that correct?
I don't think so. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. I'm taking over your job, so go ahead and answer. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Alder. No, I mean, in the future, if we decide to part ways with this company, there's a provision, a notice provision that would allow us to do that. Mm-hmm. And so also we are, I mean, hopefully if we close, we will be. So even though the management company would do, collecting the rent and shoveling the snow and the like, we will still be the owners of the property and have significant say in the future of its management in our ownership role.
So my final comment is that I'm very concerned that we should not continue to support bad actors. I mean, even in landlords. And so to hold them accountable in terms of how they treat their residents is very, very important. And I would hope that the city stays on top of that. And if we find that property manager is a bad actor, that we move on it, because we do not want to continue to put our residents in harm's way. We have some bad actors in terms of management, property management. So that concludes my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
Right. And I just want to bring your attention to number 5, because I think number 5 is what helps us terminate the management agreement. So I think that we will be able to really closely look at how the tenants are being treated over there, and use that clause in number 5 to get us out of it.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions for staff? Alder Furman, questions?
Yes. So I'd like to know, I mean, would staff commit to doing an RFP if we approve this for a year, and obviously we'd have the ability to use our out clause? That is going to be how I vote. I'd like to see us do an RFP, but is that something where we can do that, improve this contract, and because we have the 120-day out, we can do an RFP, or would we want to probably start this process all over again and with a temporary contract with this property owner, since I assume an RFP won't get done quickly enough?
Well, I mean, I think the best way that I can describe it is this is a very busy year with a lot of things going on, and one of our hopes of continuing with this property manager is just to kind of take the burden of shoveling the snow and cutting the grass off of us. Certainly we can do an RFP to find a longer term property manager for the property. But I don't want to overcommit to say that we will be able to do that, on day one that we take ownership, just given everything else that's going on at the moment.
So, would there be any sort of time frame that you guys would be comfortable saying, we would go out on RFP? Because for me, short term is not a year, 2 years, 3 years. I mean, that's a considerable amount of time in the sense of, signing up for this property manager. I'd prefer us not doing an RFP out of, an emergency because, it turns out the property manager doesn't work out in that case. I'd prefer us to, go out and bid this. Is there any sort of feeling that there'd be a comfort level with time and resources to do an RFP?
I mean, I would say within a year, assuming that something else major in the city doesn't happen in this time that requires our attention.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Moreland.
So will it be made clear to the tenants that the city is now the owner and not the current property owner in this?
Yes, I believe the tenants are already aware that we are in the process of purchasing the property, and we can certainly, as staff, on a one-to-one basis, reach out to those tenants and just have a conversation with them as the new owner.
And how many tenants are there? I'm sorry.
Mr. Rolfs, do you have the number?
I'm looking for it right now. I beg your pardon.
I think it's like 6 or 8.
I think so. We've actually had several of the leases come up, or other lease negotiations come up during our negotiations to acquire the property. And during those negotiations, we've notified anyone who is looking at either renewing a lease or entering into a new lease that the city would be the new owner in short order.
Okay. And these are business people, so I'm assuming they would know the difference between, the property manager and the owner and what complaints are kicked up the food chain, if you will, to the owner versus the property manager.
I have no doubt that when the city does become owner, we will hear any and all concerns that tenants may raise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. All right. Are there other questions for staff? All right. Seeing none, I believe we do have a motion. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of the motion? Alder Furman.
I'd like there to be a roll call, please. Thank you.
All right, a roll call has been requested, so I'll ask staff to keep themselves muted. The motion is to adopt. All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, no. I will unmute you and ask Laura to call the roll.
Alder Carter.
Just one.
Alder Carter.
Aye.
Alder Carter votes aye. Alder Furman.
No.
Alder Furman votes no. Alder Kimball.
No.
Alder Kimball votes no. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Aye.
Alder Harrington McKinney votes aye. Alder Moreland.
Aye.
Alder Moreland votes aye. Alder Revere.
No.
No. Mayor, there are 3 ayes for 3 noes.
All right, with 3 ayes and 3 noes, the motion fails. And that will take us to item number 14.
I like to offer a friendly amendment.
An alternate motion.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Alder Carter?
Yes, I would like to, is Attorney Haas on the line? He's going to have to clean this up. Oh, he's not in. Okay.
I don't believe he's on the line.
Okay, that's fine.
He is here, and we also have Attorney Paulson as well.
Oh, good.
Attorney Haas?
Because I would like to offer the motion that the CDD look for send out an RFP for property management of this property management company for this property.
So Alder, give me 1 second. This is what I always forget, is to remute everyone so we can lose the background noise. And then let's try for the attorney and the Matts to help us with the motion. So I believe the Alder's intention is to direct staff to issue an RFP. So Attorney Haas, do we need to offer line edits to the resolution to do so?
Well, yes, we need to. I'm just going to try to get that up on my screen here. Sorry, 1 second.
That's all right. Well, perhaps while we're waiting, Dan or one of the Matts, can you give us a feeling on time frame here? I'm wondering if referral might be an option. Alder Kemble would like to weigh in. Alder Kemble?
Point of order, we already voted on this item. I don't believe we should be discussing it now. And if any amendment is to happen, it could happen before council. Or maybe the alder wants to ask for reconsideration, but we've already voted.
Attorney Haas, I believe that while the item is still before us, alternate motion upon failure of a vote is appropriate.
Right. It's the subject matter is still noticed there. If it's related to that item, an alternate motion could be proposed.
But given that we do need to do would need to do line items on the resolution, Alder Carter, would you have objection to offering a substitute or an alternate before this reaches council? Sorry, you're muted, Alder.
Yes, I can do that.
All right. So given that, why don't we have staff work with Alder Carter to come up with at least an alternate resolution in time for the council meeting? And Alder Carter, you'll withdraw the motion.
I'll withdraw the motion for now. Yes.
Thank you, Alder. All right. So then I do believe that will take us to item number 14. Which is Legislature 61605, amending the 2020 adopted capital budget of the Economic Development Division to appropriate funds for a small business equity and recovery program. We do have registrants on this item. So our speaker is Jason Ilstrup of West Washington Ave in support, wishing to speak, representing Downtown Madison Incorporated.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Alders. Hope you're all doing well and having a good day. My name is Jason Ilstrup, President of Downtown Madison Inc. And this afternoon, I'm here speaking on behalf of our organization in favor of file number 61605, the Small Business Equity and Recovery Program. As I've said in the last few meetings, our entire community, including downtown Madison, continues to suffer. COVID-19 and the property destruction from the riots have placed insurmountable hurdles in front of our locally owned small businesses downtown. As the global pandemic continues, businesses are running out of resources and have had to answer difficult questions, all the while trying to ensure the livelihood of many of their employees. At the same time, our country is in the early stages of a strong, hopeful, uplifting movement for racial justice. Those of us who enjoyed the benefits of institutionalized and systematic racism are facing a long overdue awakening, which will require each of us to recognize and relinquish our privilege. These existential moments create an opportunity for our downtown and our community to cast a new vision to create a truly vibrant, inclusive, and equitable downtown. The Small Business Equity and Recovery Program is a clear statement from the city of your desired willingness to work with the private sector to provide a path towards equitable prosperity. Now is not the time to simply return to normal, but it's a time to rebuild a downtown where every individual has meaningful opportunities to fully participate in life downtown. The Small Business Equity Program is a step in the right direction. DMI fully supports all of the important tenets of this program, including grants, matching grants, increased funding to the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, making businesses more accessible, utilization of pop-up opportunities, and the creation of the Business Ready program. I'm happy to say that many of these programs' tenets are being worked on as we speak by several community groups, including DMI. We stand at the ready to help in any way we can to ensure this and every other program like it ensure that it creates a stronger community, more equitable and more inclusive downtown succeeds. DMI enthusiastically supports the Small Business Equity and Recovery Program. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. We also have registrations from Kalia Saplin of Fish Hatchery Road in support, not wishing to speak, and Aaron Cochrane, also of Fish Hatchery Road, in support, not wishing to speak. Are there questions for any of our registrants? All right, seeing none, then Alder Carter, a motion?
Move to adopt item 14-61605.
Alder Harrington McKinney, a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Are there questions for staff? Alder Moreland.
Yes, I'd like Laura or Mr. Schmidtke to give us the implications of approving this now and going forward into next year's budget, or however far it takes us.
Alder Moreland, I can provide an answer to that. So as the program is recommended in this version of the resolution, it will be funded by transferring GO borrowing appropriations from other capital projects that are either complete and had a remaining balance, or are not anticipating needing the funds in 2020 due to a delay or a project being pushed into 2021. In regards to the ongoing funding for this program, this was a request in the Economic Development Division's 2021 capital budget that the mayor has been considering in terms of funding in the 2021 executive capital budget. So in order to continue the program beyond 2020, that would be subject to appropriations in next year's capital budget.
So if we didn't use this money, given that either projects that were earmarked for using this have either been completed or taken off the table, would this benefit us from a budget standpoint as far as the current deficit that we're looking at?
These are capital appropriations. So if this amendment were to not pass, those projects could be closed, and we would cancel this remaining budget authority. So where it does have an impact is that we're transferring borrowing appropriation that otherwise we would not be borrowing for. However, using or not using these funds does not impact the projected shortfall in the 2020 operating budget. It also does not add to or take away from the shortfall that we're projecting in the operating budget for 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney, questions?
Yes, thank you. Laura, I do have a question. Of the three line items that went into the CCB fourth floor remodel for $303,000 and the $250 from Midtown and the North Side Public Safety Campus, if those two items were not rolled into the original document, will those funds be available for other projects?
So agencies could utilize those funds for expenditures that are associated with those projects. But if they were wanting to use those funds for another purpose, another capital purchase for a different project or program in their overall capital budget, they would have to come back and get authority from the council.
Okay, and as a follow-up question, approving this today, does that preclude another look at these funds and how they're allocated?
So if we were to, if this resolution does pass and the appropriation, this $750,000 of appropriation, if it's transferred for creation of the new program, we likely would not be able to. I mean, it would require another council action to utilize them for a different purpose. If I'm understanding your question correctly, are you asking about sort of broader analysis regarding overall capital spending in other instances where there may be remaining surpluses?
Yes, that, and also looking at other programs that might use part of those funding. And I just want to know if the action tonight closes that from happening again in another consideration.
Yeah. So if again, there would be opportunity to change the funding source breakdown in this resolution prior to the resolution being adopted by the full council on September 1st. So there would be another opportunity to change that.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question first for community development staff. Do we anticipate spending all $750,000 this year?
Alder, I think that's probably a question for Mr. Miklajewski.
Sorry.
Thank you, Alder. I think realistically, we may not spend the entire $750,000 this year, but what could happen is we would encumber some of the funding and the actual expense of some of that funding would continue into 2021. But it is probably an accurate statement that we would not actually spend all of that funding this year.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question for Laura about the impact of this on the 2021 budget. If we spend, my understanding is if we spend money on the capital budget in 2020, we start incurring the debt in 2021. Is that a correct understanding?
So kind of from a big picture perspective, the city's capital projects fund works on a reimbursement basis. So we borrow every fall in order to reimburse ourselves for all of the expenditures that have taken place earlier in the year. So, Dave Schmidtke can speak a little bit more about the borrowing process, but we're actually sizing the borrowing that will be authorized in September and October right now. And so we likely would not borrow any funding for this, regardless of whether or not we anticipate incurring expenditures between now and the end of the year. We would likely borrow those funds as part of a 2021 borrowing when there has been more expenditures against the project. And the reason for that action is to avoid what you've described, where we would begin to incur debt costs prior to actually spending down or needing the borrowing proceeds to spend down.
Okay. So thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So that's why when you said earlier, this will not affect our operating budget in 2021, it's because we would not be borrowing this money in that fall borrowing period or that fall borrowing event. Therefore, we would not be paying off the debt in 2021. We would start paying off the debt in 2022.
That's a correct statement.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter. Oh, apologies, Alder Carter.
Laura, just got a quick question for you. If, for example, the Midtown, can you tell me what the $250,000 was going to be used for? And first you can answer that. I'm sorry.
So the remaining balance of the Midtown project is just related to that project being wrapped up, some sort of combination of expenditures within the overall multi-million-dollar funding available for the Midtown project came in under budget. So again, what would happen if those funds were not transferred is the police department would either use the remaining funding for additional allowable capital expenditures at the Midtown station, or we would close the project and cancel any of the remaining appropriation authority.
Okay. And the Ccb remodeling, what was that for?
So this is a portion of planning funding for renovations to the 4th floor. Now, this is not a cancellation of the full remaining budget. Funding for the 4th floor renovations were added to the capital budget. I want to say 2019 to begin some broader renovation efforts that resulted from HR moving across the street. So this portion of funding that would be transferred is actually not going to have an impact on that project or its ability to continue the planning process. It's only a portion of what is the remaining budget authority.
Okay, and then let's just go for broke, the 197,000.
So those were funds that were put in to analyze the feasibility of constructing a shared police and fire station on the city's north side that would have potentially replaced what is currently Fire Station 10 and the North District Police Station. That analysis was actually able to be performed in-house with engineering and staff from fire and police. And so that planning funding that was included is no longer needed.
Okay, thank you very much. And to Matt, can you explain the difference between the small business ready program and the market ready program?
Sure, Alder. The Market Ready program was a program that was targeted specifically to potential vendors for future public market. So these were entrepreneurs that were largely in the food sector of the economy that were thinking of having a product that they could potentially sell in the public market. The business ready concept is a concept for really any entrepreneur, but with a target towards those entrepreneurs that would be in the retail sector. And the idea sort of the process for going through the Market Ready program would be applied to the Business Ready program. So we would, via RFP, solicit interest on the part of entrepreneurs to participate in the program. They would then form a cohort of entrepreneurs that would move through a series of technical assistance together. We would provide some grant funding for those entrepreneurs to work on their business plan or their marketing plan. And then in the end, there would be a handful of those entrepreneurs selected for a more significant grant funding opportunity. So the thought would be, again, to have a cohort of entrepreneurs that have an eye towards, in particular, opening a retail establishment, but it could be another type of business as well, but not having the focus on the public market as the public market.
Okay, and then also, just off the top of my head, could it be a bar?
That's an interesting question. We have not given that any thought at this point. As is noted in the resolution before you this evening, we'll need to come back to the council with the specific guidelines for the program. So certainly if the council has some direction that they would like to provide us regarding alcohol-based establishments, we'd certainly be happy to receive that.
Okay, and also if you go to page 3, the third bullet, it's increased funding to the Black Chamber and the Latino Chamber. I believe, was it earlier this year, correct me if I'm wrong, we gave each $35,000. So what are you increasing it to?
So the proposal here would not be to necessarily increase either one of those contracts right now, because as you indicated, the council supported an increase of $35,000 to each of those chambers earlier this year. We're wrapping up the contracts for that additional funding, and those chambers will use that funding to assist with some of their operations for the balance of the year. The thought, though, is as the year progresses, one of those chambers could identify a program or some technical assistance that might be useful to their members that goes above and beyond that additional administrative support that we provided them. And so what we're suggesting is that we would be open to helping to support some additional programming if those chambers or similar business organizations, which is noticed in the resolution, were to come forward. Again, if we did that, we would have to come back to you for you to approve the specific appropriation of funding. All this resolution does is set aside potential budget that could be used for that purpose. You would still need to approve the specific use.
And then this program would also, if I remember correctly, encourage businesses maybe to locate downtown?
The program is agnostic to location throughout the county. However, it would be our expectation and our hope that some of the participants would be interested in moving downtown, certainly.
Okay, and the recovery program of this is that for the businesses that have experienced damage during the protests?
There is not a downtown recovery component to what's before you this evening. Certainly, downtown entrepreneurs, especially those entrepreneurs of color, would be eligible to receive some support as outlined, but this is not a downtown recovery program. It's a much broader small business recovery program, especially focused on business owners of color.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is a follow-up also with Matt. Matt, you said that there are no specific, couple of things that I want you to address. When you said no specific guidelines, or maybe you didn't say no specific guidelines, but I'd like for you to speak on that. And also, is this a phased in? I saw an earlier proposal that there is a phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. Could you tell how these are rolled in? I certainly support thoroughly the Market Ready program, but it was over a period of time that those individuals went through a phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3, and maybe I'm getting it wrong, but they went through that training process in order for them to have and be prepared to be successful business owners. I don't see this in this proposal. Could you say more about that, please?
Sure. That's a good question. The Market Ready program that was presented to the council, the program guidelines for that program was presented to the council, and the council approved it before we moved forward. What's before you this evening is an idea to set up a Business Ready program, but the specific program guidelines of that Business Ready program will need to come back to the council for approval. So assuming the council is interested in utilizing some funding for this broader SBER effort, we would then go back, work on those guidelines, and bring them forward. You are correct, though, very, very similar to the Market Ready program. The Business Ready program would most likely be an initiative that would last over a year, maybe even more, where individuals move through a series of phases, a series of steps towards recovery. And this kind of gets to Alder Furman's question earlier regarding would we actually spend all of the funds this year? And that's an example of where we may not actually spend all of them. We would encumber a certain amount of funds to work with likely an outside third party or third parties to manage that program. And they would then work with those entrepreneurs over likely a year plus time frame.
Okay, my follow-up question, and you really hit where I was going. The appropriation is for $750,000. It's most likely that $750,000 will not be used automatically. And in developing the phases of the Market Ready program, what would be, and I know that you don't have that dollar amount, you might have it in terms of the experience with the other Market Ready program, how much will be actually, or how much is estimated that really will be allocated to move into a discovery phase and do those things to identify which businesses to partner with?
For kind of that discovery phase of which businesses to partner with, if memory serves, we spent in total about $200,000, maybe a little over $200,000 on the Market Ready program. And what we did in that case is we hired firms that were partnered through the Northside Planning Council to manage that effort. And that very first phase of identifying entrepreneurs to participate was not a significant portion of that overall contract. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was exactly, but there was not a significant dollar amount that was kind of devoted to that initial effort, just because it was at the very beginning of the process.
Okay, and my final question, I guarantee, is that I know that you have individuals on staff that are well experienced in this, beginning of the Market Ready program, because you have a model to go back to. And saying that, and in consideration for that, the Market Ready program with the public market was absolutely workable. I mean, it turned out to be a great investment for the city, and it's moving to fruition. And so what my challenge is with this is that while I do support thoroughly the concept of having this as a vehicle, what I don't support is $750,000 going into a program that it's still in its discovery phase. I would be more comfortable if it came before the body to say X amount of dollars in order to put the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, because we don't want businesses set up to fail. We absolutely know that a business will not be ready to launch immediately. The success of the Market Ready program is the time, effort, and practice that went into the program. And so it built a very successful stream of small businesses, which is absolutely amazing. I don't see where we need $750,000 in order to set up this platform.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions? All right. Is there further discussion on item 14? All right. Seeing no further discussion, it has been moved and seconded to adopt. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Alder Harrington McKinney?
I will register as not voting for it.
Alder Harrington McKinney will be noted as voting against. Is there any other objection? All right. Seeing none, then we'll record a vote in favor with Alder Harrington McKinney voting against, and that item is adopted. That will take us to item number 15, Legistar 61482, authorizing an amendment to purchase of services agreement between the city and the Greater Madison Convention and Visitors Bureau. Alder Carter, a motion, please.
I move adoption, item 15, 61482.
Alder Harrington McKinney,
Second.
moved and seconded. Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question about this item and the next item. They are really sister items of Dave Schmidtke, and I do see that Assistant City Attorney Brist is also with us, who drafted both resolutions, but I think my question is best answered by Dave. So I'll proceed with the question then. So Dave, as you recall, at the last meeting of the Room Tax Commission on July 7th, the motion that was adopted unanimously did include an item. It's actually specifically item number 8 on this very large motion that you drafted for the commission that says that the Room Tax Commission can revisit the amended 2020 room tax allocations if there is additional federal support directly provided to the city. Obviously, that has not occurred yet, except in some particular areas that we're well aware of that we'll talk about later, I'm sure, with the 2020 budget outlook and quarterly projection. But I was just wanting your assurance, and if Steve wants to weigh in as well, that although that aspect is not specifically codified or called out in either of the resolutions relating to Destination Madison or the Overture Center Foundation, that adoption of either of these resolutions by the council would not preclude that from the commission from revisiting our 2020 budget allocations. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if the Room Tax Commission did take subsequent action, the 2020 contract with Destination Madison could be amended again if that were the decision of the commission. The same with Overture. Although I will say, with Overture as well, there is a timing issue with Overture in that their second payment is in early September, but that doesn't preclude another payment being made if the commission were to decide to do that. Again, both of those contracts could be amended to reflect that later in the year if that situation does come to pass.
Thank you, Dave. Steve, did you wish to concur or say anything on this point?
I think that pretty much summed it up. We can revisit the issue. I would point out that the item 4 Overture is not introduced. It is an amendment draft or a portion of an amendment draft that has been prepared and submitted to Overture for approval. It wasn't done in time to introduce at the last council meeting, and so it will have to be introduced and approved at the next council meeting. Both steps will have to be taken for Overture at the same time.
Thank you. You anticipated my second question, Steve. Obviously, the next agenda item, which again, my questions really relate to both of these. They're sister items. That one obviously is listed on our agenda tonight as a discussion only, and obviously was not introduced directly at the Common Council meeting. But are you saying that the plan as of today is that Overture resolution would be on our agenda for adoption under suspension of the rules on September 1st?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. As he said, the payment needs to be made soon after the meeting.
Yeah, September 4th, I believe, is the day. Okay. Thank you both very much for your responses. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. All right. Are there any further questions on item number 15? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of item number 15? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item number 15 and move on to item number 16, which is Legistar 61732, a discussion pertaining to the 2020 contract between the City of Madison and the Overture Foundation. Alder Carter, a motion.
Move adoption number 16, 61732.
Alder Harrington McKinney.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Alder Verveer, did you get all your questions answered?
I did. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. So are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing none, we will do so. And move on to item number 17, which is Legistar 61252, creating sections of the MGO to prohibit the Madison Police Department from obtaining any property from the Defense Logistics Agency under the 1033 program. Let's see, Alder Carter.
Move adoption, item 17, Legistar 61252.
Alder Harrington McKinney.
Madam Mayor, I will not be seconding this.
Is there a second? Alder Furman.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Alder Furman. All right. We do have registrants on this item. Wishing to speak, Patrick Johnson of Grant Street in support.
Patrick, you're unmuted.
Hi, I'm a physician assistant student at UW-Madison, urging you to approve this ordinance to prohibit the MPD from securing any equipment from the Defense Logistics Agency. The militarization of police does nothing to protect and serve members of its communities. Police have more than enough equipment to do their job. In fact, we should be defunding and disbanding the massive stock of expensive equipment that they already have. According to Maslow's hammer, which is a cognitive bias that says that when a person is given a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. When police are outfitted with these weapons and other tools, they exaggerate an already antagonistic attitude towards citizens intent on retaining their power. Police should not exist in our communities in this way. I urge you to approve any ordinance that prevents police from securing more equipment and/or power. We should reimagine solutions to police brutality by taking funding from police and giving it back to communities.
Thank you. We also have registrations from Nicholas Davies of Wilson Street in support, not wishing to speak. David Agdello Frankel of Few Street in support, not wishing to speak. Aaron Cochrane of Fish Hatchery in support, not wishing to speak. And Kylea Saplin of Fish Hatchery in support, not wishing to speak. Are there questions for any of our registrants? All right, seeing none, are there questions for staff? Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. Would now be an appropriate time for me to move an alternate?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to move an alternate to 6125. It's been in Legistar since at least August 4th, and it's version 2. And I'm happy to speak to it if I can get a second.
Is there a second? All right, moved by Alder Furman, seconded by Alder Harrington McKinney. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. This alternate was developed based on feedback at the last Finance Committee meeting. I met with Alder McKinney, and also we had discussions with MPD to try to figure out how we can create an alternate that did not contribute to making our police department a subsidiary of the military, but actually be able to take advantage of the useful items that the department is currently getting from the 1033 program. This is set up to prohibit the police department from obtaining tear gas, bayonets, grenade launchers, grenades and explosives, armor-piercing firearms and ammunition, tracked combat vehicles, and weaponized drones from the 1033 program. I do want to note that the department is not getting any of those items currently. And it has been some time since they've gotten, I believe it was they've gotten a vehicle in the past, a long while ago. The other parts of this alternate also requires the department to get approval before they use any individual item valued over $50,000 by the Common Council, and then also a biannual report of all property received from this program to the Common Council.
Thank you, Alder. Is there further discussion? Alder Moreland.
Is Chief Wall on the line?
Let's see.
There he is.
Go ahead, Alder.
So with the recommended changes with the alternate, are you okay with that? What does that mean? What would you see as being the substantive difference between the original, I guess, ordinance change and what the alternate states?
Well, I think certainly a big difference between the original, because that would be just an absolute prohibition on everything. The substitute, I think, prohibits a few things as the Alder outlined, and those are things we're not requesting, we're not interested in requesting, we don't have a need to request, but it allows us still to get some of the things we have a use for, like the masks, tourniquets, first aid kits, those sorts of things. And so to me, it's an appropriate balance and is not something that I have any opposition to. Be a little staff time, of course, to do the twice annual reports, and occasionally for a larger ticket item to go through the council approval process. But I think that's reasonable under the circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any additional? Alder Carter.
Actually, my question was answered. I was going to ask Chief Wall the same thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Verveer.
Thank you. I have a question of the Chief. Chief, as you know, the alternate resolution suggests a $50,000 threshold be required for you to come before the Common Council before any such equipment could be transferred to the MPD. Could you recall for us how often the value of equipment you've received through this program has been valued at $50,000 or greater?
Off the top of my head, probably maybe about a half dozen times. The vehicle was one, and then some robotics over the years, so it's relatively infrequent.
And at our last Finance Committee meeting where this item was discussed, you had explained to us how this program works, and it's literally apparently a website, and that based on first come, first serve, in essence, and in Wisconsin, it's all coordinated through the state government. Could you remind us how that works, and if you were interested in an item that had a value of over $50,000, is it the potential that we just wouldn't have the time to approve it then?
I think the wording in the substitute is the council approval is for use. So I think we would go through our normal process, and if it was awarded to us, we would get it and then just set it aside somewhere while we went through that approval process. So the approval is not to obtain, but to use.
And how do you find that's fine for your operational efficiency?
Yeah, I think in some of the conversations we had during the development of this, certainly, to get approval for a box of first aid kits that have a value of $200 is not worth the staff time. So we would never ask for those things. But for a ticket item, it is worth the staff time, and then it gives that additional sort of layer of transparency to the process.
And you might also recall that there was conversation on this here at the Finance Committee. Alderperson Kimball reminded us that the work of her surveillance President's work group, I think it was, of the Common Council had worked with you, and we had codified a different approach. In essence, as I understand it, the council being able to likewise reject an acquisition after the fact. And I can't remember if you weighed in on that approach at our last meeting or not. Could you give your thoughts on that approach?
Well, I think actually the process in the surveillance ordinance is exactly what we're talking about here, is that we would be able to go through the process to ask for and obtain the item. And if it qualified as surveillance technology under the surveillance ordinance, we just set it somewhere, go through the approval process, and go from there. And if the council decided they didn't want us to use it, we just send it back. But so the process is identical, I think, or almost identical, because the surveillance ordinance has some unique pieces to it. But there'd probably be, because of that dollar threshold, a pretty good overlap between which items would qualify in their vote.
Do you recall what the dollar threshold is that's codified in that ordinance? Now
the surveillance ordinance doesn't have a threshold, but I'm just speaking based on experience for the items that might qualify under that ordinance would be more expensive.
And I see we have the drafter of both that proposal and this proposal, Assistant City Attorney Paulson, with us, and perhaps she could answer the question. But before we might turn to her or the person Kimball to answer that or and confirm what the surveillance ordinance requirements are, could you said a few moments ago, Chief, that if it was just a few boxes of tourniquets or we talked about N95 masks at the last meeting, and I know that the county sheriff has secured ponchos through this program for deputies. What would you say that a dollar figure amount would be where you don't think it would be worth your time if it requires staff to prepare a resolution for submittal to the council for approval?
Well, I think that's where the $50,000 threshold came from.
Do you really think that it's not worth your staff's time to secure anything if it's valued at less than $50,000?
Yeah, I think, again, this is independent from the surveillance ordinance, which sort of stands alone. It's just, when we are using this where things can be coming in, on varying schedules, and obviously the staff time to write a resolution, to get a sponsor, to staff, the council meeting, the finance meeting, the PSRC committee meeting, for all those things, for something that is a relatively low dollar value. I think the practical impact of that would be just we wouldn't do it just because of that staff need.
And then the final question I have is, looking at the list of proposed items that would be strictly prohibited in the alternate resolution, I believe you already articulated that you have no objections to this list, or that the city police department hasn't secured any of these sorts of items through the program in the last few years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then I know I mentioned this at our last meeting, but it wasn't I don't know that it was a question of you, Chief, but I believe that perhaps, and you could ask Alderperson Furman this, but that this list in part was derived from the federal congressional legislation an amendment specifically in the Senate, if I recall correctly. But I'm curious exactly why we continue to talk about armor piercing, firearms and ammunition, as opposed to all firearms and ammunition. Would we ever, in your estimation, Chief, secure any firearms or ammunition through this program in the future?
I think the reason for that is to parallel what the legislation is. We did obtain a few firearms back in the 90s that we have since returned. I personally don't see a situation where we would be seeking firearms through this program. So I'm not opposed to any prohibition. I don't think we would get ammunition through the program, but I'll remind people that if you go back 15-ish, 18-ish years ago, and we saw a massive spike in ammunition prices that really put the city budget in a bind. And for a few years where things really spiked, and so I don't know that I rule it out, because we wouldn't be getting ammunition any different in terms of characteristics than we would purchase. We're not going to get something different. We just might be able to get it for free.
Thank you. So, Mayor, I see that Alderperson Kimball raised her hand. Perhaps it was to answer my question about the surveillance ordinance. Could we?
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead, Alder Kimball.
Put to her, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. In the surveillance ordinance, any surveillance equipment defined as such in the ordinance that is procured through the 1033 program has to go get approval, no matter how much it costs. Any surveillance equipment under the definition in that ordinance has to get council approval.
And if I could ask Alder, is it the similar language to what's proposed in the alternate, in terms of that the MPD could go ahead and secure it, order it through the state, but then could not use it until its approval is authorized by the common council?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor. That's all for now.
Thank you, Alder. All right. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to Acting Chief Wall. Chief Wall, would you share with your experience with the 1033 program and how your recall is pretty sharp with this program? Could you share that with the body, please? How long have you been involved in the 1033 program procurement?
Well, so as an agency, we had used it sort of sporadically going back to the 90s, and then I think we sort of fell off for a while, and then I was kind of forced to sort of get us back into it maybe less than 10 years ago. And so I've sort of been, most 90% of the things that we've received have been things that I've requested through there. There's a small number of commanders that are authorized to even get on the interface and go through and look for property and request it. So it's not like something where anybody in the police department can go online and request things. There's just a few commanders assigned to special teams that have this oversight and capacity and authorization to go through and look at it. And it's stuff they're getting rid of, so there's usually a reason for it. So a lot of times if things don't work well or they're not in good condition, but occasionally you can find some things that are really valuable and work well and really fit a critical need for some of our functions. And so having that capacity has really been helpful for us.
So my final question, I think, is that the accountability in terms of purchasing items through the 1033 program and actually using those as per purchase. I mean, what is the accountability that is on the department to use these items as they were requested? What does that accountability look like beyond the local police department?
Well, so there's a state coordinator who works in the state Department of Emergency Management. And so the state has oversight at the state level. So all our requests first go to the state. If we want to request an item, we have to articulate why and use it for. And then the state coordinator reviews those requests and either approves or denies them. And then it goes to the federal level, and there's a similar threshold review that happens at the federal level. Then the state really is the entity that monitors our inventory. So once a year, we have to go through our inventory and make sure we have everything that's on the list. If there's anything we no longer want to use, depending on how it's classified, we typically have to return it to them through the state. And then in some instances, it's not on a regular annual schedule, but sometimes the state will actually come and do a site visit to physically inspect certain items to make sure that we still have them and make sure that they're accounted for. And then there's a long agreement with the state that we have to sign that certifies that we're using the equipment only for official purposes and not for personal use, and that we'll take care of it and that sort of thing.
Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Alder. All right. I see no other questions for staff. Also, is there any discussion? Just a reminder, the motion is the alternate. Alder Carter.
I'm going to be asking for a roll call, but I am going to support this, and I want to thank both Alder Furman and Alder McKinney for coming up with compromise and not compromise on both sides of this discussion of the 1033 program. But I'm asking for a roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Carter. Alder Verveer.
Thank you. I'm wondering if I could ask the main author of the alternate, Alderperson Furman, a question or two about his thoughts on a couple of the issues I raised previously. And as perhaps we're unmuting him, I do want to join in thanking Alder Furman and McKinney for working on this alternate. I appreciate their efforts to try to find a compromise.
Alder Furman?
Sure. I'll see if I can remember all the questions. So I will say that the approval language, which I think about the over $50,000 for an individual item. I asked the attorney's office to model that after the surveillance. So that was the goal, for it to be as close to that as possible. So the idea that, they can acquire it but can't use it until they get approval. And then, we very much focused on the legislation that was in the Senate, which has a laundry list of very long, impressive list of organizations throughout the country that were supporting that amendment, but unfortunately failed. But we modeled the list of items from that, and did talk to the department, and did press the chief on, was there other items that he felt comfortable adding? And at this time, he didn't have suggestions. I do think the goal with the biannual report was for the council to continue to think about, are there other items that we should be prohibiting the department from getting through this program? And obviously, if we're seeing a list of things that they're getting, at any point we can decide, we don't want to see them get that particular item anymore. But ultimately, this was developed so we can continue to, take advantage of items that, at least in my opinion, are not controversial, and we have seen has saved the city a considerable amount of money over the years. So that was the goal of the amendment.
Thank you. Would you possibly consider it friendly to I'll just start here, but strike the phrase armor piercing and D of the alternate, so that it would be any firearms and ammunition would be prohibited from being secured by MPD under the 1033 program?
I would probably no. I think the reason for that would be what the chief said, which is, if we run into a situation where the cost of firearms or ammunition goes up, I think a compromise that I'd be willing to suggest is if you wanted to be more specific on you don't want them to get firearms or ammunition that's more military grade than what they use as police officers, maybe something along the lines of equipment that they're currently using. So for example, they're getting a particular gun now, and all of a sudden that the military is able to offer it, and the price of that gun spikes, and we're able to get that from the military. That'd be fine. I certainly don't want this program to be used for getting military grade firearms that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So I don't know if we're going to figure that out here now, but as it makes its way to council, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. And then, of course, my other issue was where did the $50,000 figure come from? Would you consider lowering that amount as a friendly amendment to say $10,000?
Sure. I would ask the chief. I gave him, I talked to him about a bunch of different numbers, and 50,000 was what he was most comfortable with. And so the only thing I would say is, I don't have a problem personally lowering that, but I would be concerned with, the ramifications for the department and how they would change the usage. I don't, that number from 10 to 50,000, I obviously don't know what that covers. I don't know what item would fall underneath, that dollar range to feel comfortable enough now without asking the chief to come back and tell us, here are some items that would fall there that they wouldn't get otherwise if they had to come back for approval.
Well, thank you again, Mayor. I'm prepared to offer an amendment or two to the alternate resolution unless there are other questions of staff or other debate. I see that Alderperson McKinney seeking recognition.
Yeah, so Alder, let's go to Alder Harrington McKinney, and I'll return to you, Alder Verveer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, what I want to add is that Alder Furman, myself, and Acting Chief Wall spent some intensive time going through and asking him over the 10 years of his experience what has been purchased. And over a 10-year experience, what had been purchased by the Madison Police Department made me secure that this program would not, the items that were listed in this resolution was appropriate. The other thing that I would like to address is that the list of organizations that approved the Senate version was quite impressive. And I asked Alder Furman to send me that list because I just wasn't completely, that completed me. So once I saw the list of the organizations that supported these items that were listed on the Senate side in our resolution, I was quite confident that we were on the right track. So I am supporting this alternate as it's been presented by Alder Furman. We did have a discussion about the $50,000 threshold. That's a discussion that we did have, but as it is presented, I will be supporting that.
Thank you, Alder. All right, Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. So I move the following amendment to the alternate resolution. Strike the phrase armor piercing in sub 2D.
Is there a second? Alder Kemble.
And
Alder Kemble will second. Alder Verveer.
Oh, thank you. I think I've made my point, Mayor, and I just, perhaps I'm ignorant, but I would hope the MPD would never have any armor-piercing firearms or ammunition in their use. So it seems to me that armor-piercing firearms and ammunition is abhorrent to all of us, and it goes without saying that that would never be secured through the 1033 program, I would think. So I would just simply be more comfortable if we, again, limited the reach under this program and made this separation from the Pentagon by saying all firearms and ammunition. And let me just also say that I mean absolutely, of course, no disrespect whatsoever to my two colleagues that worked hard on the alternate. I totally, as I said earlier, appreciate their good work. To secure my support, I just would feel a little more comfortable if there were some changes to the alternate. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Moreland.
I would like to ask the chief to address the restriction of that and what his feelings are, if we've ever purchased anything of that nature. And if we have, when and for what purpose.
So the question is about the
armor, right? The armor piercing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't personally have a huge objection to that because we've not bought that equipment or asked for it or used it at any point. Not that I'm aware of since I've been here.
Can you think of any instances where it might be beneficial to have that?
Have armor piercing.
It seems pretty daunting. I don't know.
So just to be clear, Alder, and for the chief, what Alder Rivera's amendment does is remove the language around armor piercing, so that the restriction would be on all ammunition. Is that, Alder Rivera, that's the intent of your amendment, correct?
Yes, thank you. That's correct. It would prohibit MPD from securing any firearms or ammunition from the 1033 program.
Okay. Chief Wall?
Again, it's not something that we're requesting. It's not something we're looking for now. It's not something we've done. But again, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, we could find ourselves in a very different economic situation where your ammunition costs are quadrupled or quintupled, and we need to look for opportunities elsewhere. So that's my only concern, is the unintended consequences of this, because again, we wouldn't be able to get anything from them that we wouldn't just purchase anyway someplace else. So it isn't a matter of the different type of ammunition that we get. It's just whether we pay for it.
So if you find that you're in a situation where you need this this equipment, this ammunition, if you weren't able to use this particular source, then you could buy it without asking for permission. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we have a budget now to purchase ammunition, and we do. I'm just concerned with the potential where the costs increase so much that it exceeds the budget, and we don't have the capacity for it down the road, which we have seen in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
So, Chief Wall, Acting Chief Wall, if you had to, can you tell me how much in percentages, not dollar amount, you've seen the ammunition go up, and whether or not you needed to come to the council for a budget amendment, not to purchase the ammunition, but because it went because it increased so much, you had to come back and ask for more money for other things.
Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I don't have that. The spike, I think, goes back to, it's longer than I had recalled, but it was going back into the mid 2000s. It was a profound, triple, quadruple. I mean, it was a major cost increase. And back then, I was not involved in the budgets and things like that. So I don't know how we dealt with it in the short run. Certainly, we had to request increases in the annual budget moving forward to account for it. But I'm sorry, I don't have more details on that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other alders in the queue. So the question is Alder Revere's amendment to strike the words armor piercing. I anticipate a roll call is requested. So I will unmute you all and ask Laura to call the roll.
Alder Carter. Alder Carter.
And is this for the original? I mean, is this for the substitute or
This is for this is for the amendment. This is for Alder Revere's amendment to remove the words armor piercing. And so vote aye is to strike the words. A vote no is to keep the words.
No.
Alder Carter votes no. Alder Furman.
No. Oh, no, mine's aye. Strike them. Okay. No, never mind. Come back to me. I'm all twisted here.
Alder Furman.
No.
Alder Furman votes no. Alder Kimball.
Aye.
Alder Kimball votes aye. Alder Harrington McKinney.
No.
Alder Harrington McKinney votes no. Alder Moreland.
No.
Alder Moreland votes no. Alder Revere.
Aye.
Alder Revere, aye. And Alder Carter.
No.
Alder Carter votes no. Mayor, there are 4 noes, 2 ayes.
With 4 noes, that amendment fails. Let me mute you all again. And turn back to Alder Revere.
Thank you again, Mayor. One last amendment. So I would move to amend the alternate resolution in 518 sub 1, strike the number 50,000 and replace it with $10,000.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second? Alder Kimball.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Alder Revere.
Well, thank you. Obviously, the amendment is self-explanatory, and we've already discussed it. The questions with staff and that is the chief and so forth. Again, I do appreciate the work done on the alternate. I just am not comfortable supporting the alternate as proposed, and would feel much more comfortable if the dollar value was lower. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm gonna have some questions for Chief Wall about that $10,000 item and what the impact of the program usage would look like, and possibly what are some items in that $10,000 to $50,000 range that you folks may not go for if this was moved down to 10,000.
Yeah, going from memory without having the list in front of me, I think usually that's probably going to capture night vision things, for a single item, and that exceeds $10,000. So from memory, that's the thing that's jumping to mind, at least that we have requested and received previously. Again, I guess in terms of one item for $10,000, I think we really just have to weigh whether it's worth the staff time to go through the process to do the resolution and the meetings and the committee follow-up for it. So I think that's the biggest concern on my end is staff time to doing that. And as a reminder, with the alternate, we'd be doing the twice a year report to council with everything that we receive. And that certainly gives the council opportunity to ask questions or point something out that is of concern.
And if, so you mentioned that report, if we discover in that biannual report that the department received something and, we wished for the department no longer to use that, would there be any sort of process for you folks to send that back for the council to, obviously, changing the resolution probably wouldn't work, but, for past items, but, would a resolution telling you the department, please send back, this item, is that something that's workable?
Well, I mean, just in terms of mechanics, it's I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's certainly we have sent plenty of things back to them before, and there's a process to do it. It's federal government, so it's not without its hurdles to go through, but it's something that's easy enough to do. So we do that with some regularity when there's things that don't work anymore that we decide we don't want to keep anymore. We go through the process and return it. So the mechanics of that are fairly easy.
So it's fair to say, though, if you guys acquired an item that was $15,000, and you're not really coming up with many items that would be the case. If the council came back and said no, we don't want you to use that, you obviously have to go through all the hoops of sending it back. And so I assume that's part of the reason why you'd like to see a higher threshold for the $50,000, so you're not constantly getting things and sending them back.
Well, that and my guess is that I don't think there's anything on the list we currently have that would be of concern to anybody on the council. I mean, we've shared that list, with the media and publicly, and I think we'd be surprised if anything we ever got above $10,000 was of any concern to anyone on the council. So I would rather have the unlikely case where someone sees something on the report and wants us to return it than have to get approval every single time and go through, use all that staff time for things that are non-controversial and not really that interesting. So it's really just a matter of efficiency and workload and capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other alders wishing to speak. So the motion is to amend to reduce the limit to 10,000 from 50,000. It has been moved and seconded. Is there objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Alder Furman requests a roll call.
Yes, please.
All right. So the amendment is to reduce the threshold to 10,000 from 50,000. All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, no. I will unmute you and ask Laura to call the roll.
Alder Carter?
No.
Alder Carter votes no. Alder Furman?
No.
Alder Furman votes no. Alder Kimball?
Aye.
Alder Kimball votes aye. Alder Harrington McKinney?
No.
Alder Harrington McKinney votes no. Alder Moreland?
No.
Alder Moreland votes no. Alder Verveer?
Aye.
Alder Verveer votes aye. Mayor, there are 4 noes, 2 ayes.
Thank you. With 4 noes, that motion fails. And so that brings us back to the main motion, which is the alternate. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, there's been a roll call requested, so we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of the alternate, aye. Those opposed, no. As your name is called, I will unmute you all and ask Laura to call the roll.
Alder Carter?
Aye.
Alder Carter votes aye. Alder Furman?
Aye.
Alder Furman votes aye. Alder Kimball?
No.
Alder Kimball votes no. Alder Harrington McKinney?
Aye.
Alder Harrington McKinney votes aye. Alder Moreland?
Aye.
Alder Moreland votes aye. Alder Verveer?
No.
Alder Verveer votes no. Mayor, there are 4 ayes, 2 noes.
Thank you. With 4 ayes, that item passes. And we'll mute you all again. And that takes us to item 24, which is the second quarter projections for the 2020 operating budget. Laura, is that you?
Yep, that is. Okay, great. So I will share my screen here. Okay, so in walking through the second quarter projections, I'm just going to present some slides that summarize the memo that was, hang on one second, this isn't right. Oops. Let me just change one thing here. Okay, now it works. So I'm just going to walk through some slides that summarize the memo that was attached in the packet that you received last Friday. So again, we're here today to talk about the second quarter projection. So the second quarter would reflect updated expenditures and revenues through the end of June. So this analysis was completed in conjunction with agencies in mid-July for your presentation today. So this is not advancing, hang on. There we go. So when we look at the second quarter, we compare it from the first quarter. In general, the general and library funds, the projected shortfall decreased by $770,000. So at the first quarter, between these two funds, we were projecting a budget gap of about $9 million. Based off of the second quarter, the projected gap is $11.1 million. And one thing that's important to note here is that these numbers that we're projecting here do not reflect the receipt of CARES Act funding that has come through a variety of federal sources. It does not include the FEMA reimbursement that we're working on through the Public Assistance Program. And it also does not include applying the $4 million that the city has received through the state Roots to Recovery program. Those sources altogether are projected currently at $13.5 million. So that has a net positive impact on what we're projecting here. In regards to the other funds, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, the enterprise group is projecting a $12 million shortfall, which brings our all funds projected gap to about $23.2 million. Now, when we look at how that compares to the $30 million that we were projecting at the first quarter, the bulk of that change is in the all funds projection. And that is due to a couple of things that I'll talk about more in a couple of minutes, but notably this takes into account the room tax reductions that have been approved by the Room Tax Commission. This also reflects positive numbers for the water utility that takes into account the new rate increase that just went into effect that we weren't projecting at the first quarter. So if we dive in just a little bit to look at the general and library funds, this slide here compares our quarterly and monthly spending to prior years. So one of the things that we've closely been monitoring is how are our expenditures varying when we compare it against the same period in the prior years. So if we look at this first chart, 2020 is this red bar. And so you can see in the first quarter, the spending was slightly higher than 2017 and 18, but lower than what we had experienced in 2019. And then that same trend is actually carrying through the second quarter. So while the 2020 spending is higher than 18 and 17, it is still lower than what we had experienced in 2019. Now, if you look just specifically at what we've, on the expenditure side, where we've been most impacted specifically on COVID has been around unanticipated supply spending. So if we look just at supply spending, this chart down below is comparing our monthly spending to the same month in the prior years. And you can see that for supplies, we saw an uptick in March and April. That trended downward through May before starting to creep back up slowly in June and July. So I would say from a big picture expenditure perspective, when we look at these numbers, overall our expenditures are not that drastically out of whack compared to prior years. Where we continue to see the biggest impacts on the city's budget, specifically around COVID, is on revenues and the impact on our general fund revenues. So now I'll spend a couple of minutes of just kind of talking through places in the budget where we've seen major changes from the first to second quarter. So the first area is the clerk's office. So the clerk's office at the end of the second quarter is projecting a $1.4 million deficit, which is a $1.3 million increase from the first quarter. Now, one thing that is important just to keep in mind, and it's highlighted in the memo, in terms of how second quarter compares to first quarter, is that at the first quarter, much of what we had to do was make assumptions about what we thought would happen. In the second quarter, we have the benefit of having actual trend data of what is actually happening, and then how we want to kind of forecast those trends to move forward for the rest of the year. So the clerk's office is a great example of this in regards to the timing of when we were doing the first quarter projections and the April election. And so we were making a lot of assumptions in those first quarter numbers about what we thought the April election was going to cost us, and then how also making assumptions about potentially being back to some sort of normal state for the August or November elections. But obviously what we know now is that the April election was slightly more expensive than what we had accounted for in the first quarter. So we were assuming that April election was going to cost $500,000. It ultimately cost $640,000. And we now know, by virtue of a lot of really terrific planning in the clerk's office, we know we have a more realistic sense of what the August and November elections are going to cost based off of the plans around those elections. So we are projecting that both August and November will cost $1 million. And that is compared to about $1.1 million for both of those elections that was assumed in the budget. So we are still projecting that November will cost more than August, but we really need to kind of see how tomorrow goes in particular and make adjustments off of that. So I will note, though, the clerk's office has been awarded funding through the state as well as through a nonprofit partner to help to offset our increased election costs. So those two grants total $1.4 million, and they're not reflected here in these numbers. The next department that had a big change was the fire department. This actually swung for the better from the first to second quarter. So we're projecting that they will have a $1 million deficit at the end of the year, and that's a $1.1 million decrease from what we were projecting in the first quarter. So what's really happening here is two parts. So the fire department has a series of revenues that are budgeted within their budget. And we are projecting that those will come in under budget by about $178,000. Now, a portion of that is due to the general state of the economy, specifically around things like elevator and fire permits and just less activity in that space. The second piece is around special duty and reimbursement costs associated with various events that are staffed by the fire department. So in the first quarter, we had assumed that any summer and fall events that required fire department personnel on a reimbursement basis, we anticipated that those things would happen. And now we are projecting that those events will be canceled and will not take place in 2020. Most notably in that category would be fall football and the fire department costs associated with that. On the expenditure side, the overall outlook for the fire department improved by $1.2 million. Now, a big piece of this is from permanent salaries. So we've been talking to this committee a lot in previous presentations around the budget, around turnover levels in the fire department and how turnover is not keeping pace with turnover is happening at a slower pace than what our recruitment activities are happening. So the fire department will not be holding a fall recruit class and would be deferring that recruitment to 2021. So that will result in about a $400,000 savings. The next item is on overtime. So overtime in the fire department is actually trending downward. Part of that is updating assumptions from the first quarter around needing overtime to staff elevator inspections and backing that off. The other piece of overtime savings that we'll realize here is around training. So if there's not a recruit class that's happening at the end of the year, there will not be overtime shifts associated with deferring that training. And then finally, the last category of what is contributing to the trend is supply and purchase services spending trending lower than the first quarter. Much of this is related to purchasing controls that the fire department has put in place, resulting from the administrative actions that are currently in place regarding non-essential spending. There are also savings here that are associated with, again, deferring the recruit class to next year. So the next agency is the police department. So we are projecting a $2.4 million deficit in police, and that's an increase of $1.1 million from the first quarter. So through the second quarter, police costs associated with responding to the unrest was about $1.5 million. Now, the majority of that $1.5 million that's been incurred was for overtime costs associated with MPD staffing. We've also received billings from some other jurisdictions that have provided mutual aid as part of the responses that took place through the second quarter. The chart here on this slide really demonstrates how 2020 police overtime spending compares to 2019. And so, as you can see, really through May, with the exception of a slightly higher month of February, overtime spending was really trending in line with the prior year. And then it's into June and July where we saw the peaks, and now we're slowly starting to come down. However, this August number is only accounting for one payroll, so we'll see how that trend continues to evolve through the remainder of the year. But just based off of these numbers through the first half of the year, we're spending about double what we had spent in 2019 on police department overtime. Now, these numbers include a series of assumptions regarding what will happen in the second quarter. That these assumptions obviously get updated as we have new information, but we're making assumptions around that there'll be some sort of freak fest. Obviously, that is it's a conservative outlook. Assuming a smaller presence at UW football, which obviously will be updated based off of decisions by the university. But then there's also an assumption that there'll be at least one additional major event that would result in higher overtime. The other item beyond just overtime costs that really has changed the course of the second quarter projection for police is around revenue. So at the first quarter, we were assuming that we would that the SROs would return to the school district in the fall. And so the second quarter projection has been updated to reflect the cancellation of that contract. Through the first half of the year, there was about $118,000 received through that contract. So with the cancellation, that will result in a $242,000 deficit. The other item that is contributing to the revenue loss is largely around special duty and police service, those reimbursable costs to offset overtime. The next agency is the Streets Division. So we are projecting a $263,000 deficit for the Streets Division. This is a $620,000 increase from the first quarter. Now, the change in the projection here is really based off of updated assumptions pertaining to how staff time is allocated across the different funding sources for Streets Division staff. So depending upon the time of the year, Streets Division is charging their staff time to any combination of the city's general fund, the stormwater fund for street sweeping activities, and then the urban forestry special charge for their urban forestry related costs. So what we've seen between the first and second quarters is just a change in assumptions regarding how that staff time is being charged, which is resulting in increased staff time being charged to the general fund. The other item to note is that we are projecting that there'll be 3 additional major snowplow events in the fourth quarter. This is higher than what we've seen in past years as it pertains to fourth quarter snow. Just for context, in 2019, there was one general plow event that took place in the fourth quarter. Typically, those fourth quarter snows are happening when the weather is a little bit warmer, and so they are. We're more equipped to respond to those snow events with our in-house resources rather than having to call in the contractors. The other item that we are assuming here as well is that we will have to purchase additional salt inventory in the fourth quarter. However, there is potential that purchase could occur in January without impacting snow operations. Next item in here is the library. The library is projecting a $1.2 million surplus. This is an increase of $860,000 from the first quarter. The big story here with the library is at the end of the first quarter, we were projecting that at some point in 2020, more specifically in the second quarter, that libraries would be reopening to some degree or to some level. The second quarter projection assumes that the libraries will essentially remain closed or operating under the model that they have in place today for the remainder of the year. So that means that there will still be the curbside pickups, the computing appointments, and the limited services that are available today. So that change in assumption reduced the projected expenditures by about $800,000 in the library. The other thing just to note here is that the library is holding 10.6 positions vacant. Those are their permanent positions, and that is in addition to a variety of hourly positions that are also being held open for the remainder of the year. Moving on now to the Parks Division. So the Parks Division is projecting a $130,000 deficit. This is a $695,000 decrease from the first quarter. And the driver of the change here is around revenues that are budgeted in the Parks Division budget. This is that we've seen and had to provide reimbursements for in the second quarter. The other thing to note is that the Parks Division has been one of the benefiting agencies of redeployed staff time. So that has actually helped in terms of reducing their overall reliance on the need for hourly employees. So finally, the community development is projecting a $56,000 surplus. This is a $263,000 decrease from the first quarter. The big change here is around assumptions for the city's child care program. So the tuition assistance program consistently has about a $100,000 surplus year over year. That was included in how we were in the first quarter. But this, under the second quarter assumptions, that surplus would be used for some sort of childcare response to help families in the fall while MMSD is in a virtual learning environment. So now moving on to the enterprise agencies. This slide here just kind of shows how those funds have changed from the first to the second quarter. So in places where we have the green arrow trending up, that's showing that the overall outlook improved for that fund. And in places where we have the red arrow trending down, that's showing that the outlook has worsened. And as I was mentioning, these funds, the projected deficit fell from just under $19 million to essentially just over $12 million. As I was mentioning earlier, the biggest driver of this are incorporating all of the reductions for the room tax commission and in the water utility in terms of realizing the new revenue from their rate increase. Now on the flip side, both the parking utility and Metro, our assumptions and outlook at the first quarter turned out to be more optimistic than what we're actually seeing in terms of actual trend data through the second quarter. So looking at these one by one, as I mentioned, the water utility is now projecting a surplus of about $630,000. That's an increase of about $4 million from what we were projecting at the first quarter. The overall rate increase was about 9% and took effect in the first week of August. So we are assuming about a 6% revenue increase in the month of August and then about 8.9% for the remainder of the year. One thing to note that while this revenue is up from what we've seen in prior years, utilization in the overall system continues to be down, just attributed largely to the loss from commercial and business accounts. And so one thing I think that's really helping the water utility is that the 2020 budget did not assume that there would be any sort of rate increase. So because there was an expenditure plan built around now the old rates, it's really helping them out that they were able to secure the rate increase coupled with a number of expenditure reductions that have been put in place in order to ensure that they end 2020 in a positive outlook. As I was mentioning, in the case of both Metro and the parking utility, both of those agencies saw their projected deficits increase from the first to second quarters. In the first quarter, we were assuming that the Metro fare boxes would be back to some semblance of normal by July. However, now we are projecting that getting back to that higher level or a more normal level of fare box collections is not something that we would achieve in 2020. I will also note that this projection does not include the application of any of the CARES Act funding that Metro received in 2020. There also hasn't been any formal budget amendment, a formal budget amendment to come back and appropriate the use of those funds. And so any sort of spending plan around how those would be incorporated to help with the deficit, that is still subject to council approval. And then finally, the parking utility is projecting a $6.5 million deficit. This again was assuming that we would be about at least at 50% of prior year trends at some point in the second quarter. Again, and now we're not assuming that we will hit that level until much closer into 2021. And then wrapping up here, Monona Terrace is projecting a $2.3 million deficit. Now, this projection includes the 50% reduction that was approved by the Room Tax Commission, with one caveat: a portion of how Monona Terrace will be absorbing that reduction is by deferring capital expenditures that were authorized and funded by room tax appropriations in 2020. This also is rather optimistic in that it is assuming a September opening date, which is pushed back from August in the first quarter. So these numbers are built around maintaining the 75 paying booked events that were planned from September through December, which again is a rather optimistic outlook. And then finally, the room tax fund, we're projecting a small surplus, but again, that is really due to the reductions that had been implemented by the Room Tax Commission. So with that, it can take any questions that folks have on the second quarter.
Thank you, Laura. Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you very much, Laura, for you and your colleagues in the budget sections. Excellent work. I found the memo exceedingly helpful when I read it on Friday. Actually, there was a lot of news packed into that memo, and I appreciate all the updates. Before I ask a few questions, Mayor, did you want to take the opportunity now to address city employees, as you had mentioned in that Friday email to all employees that you had planned to address them and confirm your plans that no furloughs are required this year and so forth?
Yes, thank you, Alder. That is correct. I mean, you've all now seen the second quarter projections, and you, I hope, can see the results of the very good work by all of our agencies to defer hiring, to defer purchasing, to save money in any number of different ways, including through several work share programs in different divisions. Due to that, some of the numbers breaking in a more positive way than we expected, and also to the CARES Act funding mostly that has come to Metro. At this point, we are fairly sure that we will not have to turn to furloughs in 2020. I'll note that we'll get to the 2021 question at our next item. And at this point in time, I'm not saying anything about the 2021 budget. But for 2020, finance staff and my office are feeling good about our ability to manage all the items that you just heard about in a way that doesn't require us to have any additional furloughs. Now, I should caveat that we do have some of those work share plans that extend through the fall, and that we may still need to look at additional work share plans depending on the needs of the individual departments and frankly also on the federal situation. So that may happen on a more targeted basis, but in terms of an across the board furlough that everyone would have to take, at this point, we're not moving towards that. And I think everybody who has worked to make that possible, and I'm very hopeful that we can continue in this vein, but it is going to be a challenge for all of us, as we'll hear again in our next item, to deal with the 2021 operating budget. And thank you, Alder Verveer, for the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you again, Mayor, and thanks for providing that great reassurance to our employees, both in your communication on Friday and then in the last few minutes. I know that a lot of them have been very much on edge, worried about their financial future this year. So, Laura, again, thank you for the excellent memo and presentation. And by the way, I noted that the slides that you just shared with us have yet to be updated in Legistar, and I'm sure that you would do that in the normal course, but just a quick reminder that there was additional graphs and representations in the slides you just shared that I think would be interesting to people and allow for the memo to be more easily consumed perhaps. So just a reminder to please upload those slides into Legistar for this item when you're able to. Since the mayor mentioned WorkShare, Laura, and you talked about WorkShare in your presentation and in the memo, could you give us a bit more detail as to what your assumptions that you've just presented to us assume in terms of the number of employees participating in WorkShare, and for that matter, employees that are redeployed to other agencies? Do you, in both of those areas, do you generally assume that the current experience will continue indefinitely, both for redeployment and WorkShare through DWD?
So in the case of WorkShare, we're assuming that those employees will be back to their full city roles, in accordance with the plans, with the agreed to WorkShare plans. So for example, the parking utility has 28 employees on a WorkShare program, and that particular plan is scheduled to end on September 1st. So in the case of WorkShare, we assume that we will begin to incur those personnel costs in accordance with what the approved plan is in place. In regards to the redeployment, most of the redeployment that's happening is for seasonal type activity. And so we do assume that those items will ramp down as that seasonal work would typically come to an end.
I see. So you actually don't anticipate any, say in the fourth quarter of this year, as of tonight, you don't anticipate that very many employees actually would still be redeployed or in WorkShare at the end of this year, let's say?
I'll speak to redeployment. Dave has been working much closer on WorkShare, so I guess, again, in terms of the numbers that we're projecting, we're projecting in accordance with the plans that are currently in place. In the case of redeployment, we would be assuming that people are primarily back to their primary locations by the end of this year. Now, if somebody is redeployed from one general fund agency to another general fund agency, we would be paying the wages for that individual's time no matter what. And so I think that we, again, like I said, we will just assume that people would be back to their home bases by the end of the year.
Thank you. And I see Dave is seeking recognition, Mayor, to speak.
But let me just say that, a lot of the question on redeployment is dependent on the course of the virus and, our plans around reopening city facilities and bringing back in-person service. And, for example, how long do we need to continue to have virtual meetings? There's just any number of things that I think would impact both the ability to have staff redeployed and the need for that. So I think that in terms of the projections and the assumption is that we move back towards, quote, normal. But I don't anticipate that anything is normal for the rest of the year. So it is possible that we will still need to consider redeployment, and that's just going to continue to be on the basis of who is available and where there might be need for staff to move to. So Alder Verveer, I don't want you or anyone else to think that we're not still looking at that as an option. But I think that as Laura says, that if it's between general fund agencies, there's really no budgetary impact. And for other agencies, the more conservative assumption is to assume that it's not going to happen. So that in terms of the financial projections, that's the safer assumption to be making right now. And then Dave, do you want to speak to WorkShare?
Thank you, Mayor. All I'll add on WorkShare is that there's a maximum of 6 months in a 5-year period that you can participate in WorkShare. So there's a large group of the parking cashiers that are in WorkShare for a 6-month period that began basically at the end of May and will end at the end of November. So those individuals cannot continue in WorkShare and not go back into WorkShare and unless 5 years has elapsed. A lot of what's left in terms of WorkShare participation was to both save money and to take advantage of the $600 a week add-on, which at the moment has ended, although there have been executive orders from the White House that sort of raise some possibility of continuation. But nonetheless, so those are sort of the two buckets that they're in. And so folks could return to WorkShare, I suppose, if necessary, but in those, or if there's an advantage to some extent. But those large groups in those areas that are most affected by revenue decline, such as parking and parts of Monona Terrace, would have exhausted that WorkShare window under current law.
Thank you. I appreciate all those responses. And then if I could just go back to speaking of federal law and assistance that we've received or expect to receive through the CARES Act and through FEMA reimbursement. Laura, could you perhaps go over for us once again what your assumptions were in this second quarter projections? I know that, for example, through the FTA, we have $24.5 million from the CARES Act. Is it still your assumption that we would be utilizing a little under $9 million of that in 2020, or is that figure dated and it's a greater percentage as of tonight? So
again, the overall deficit number does not take into account the use of CARES Act, FEMA funding, or routes to recovery as part of a larger plan to bring the budget into balance. But Alder Verveer, as you mentioned in regards to the CARES Act, one of the most sizable awards was for Metro. There were also awards through CDBG, CDA, the clerk's office piece as a pass-through for the elections, and a smaller public safety amounts. And obviously this is leaving out the large source of funding that the county has allotted through their award for public health. So in regards to how those dollars wind up playing into 2020, we're currently preparing an application to FEMA that will be for just under $1 million of reimbursable costs through the public assistance program. The Routes to Recovery award for the city is about $4.1 million. And so we'll be submitting our first drawdown for those funds within the September reporting window. And then again, the CARES Act, you're correct, that the current assumption is that we would apply just under $9 million of that funding to 2020, and then utilize the rest of the Metro share in 21 and beyond. So all of those items will be part of a larger budget amendment package to actually appropriate and amend the budget that would be coming back through the council in the fall.
Thank you. And I realize there's tons of moving parts here and pieces and so forth. So you anticipated my next question about the FEMA Public Assistance Program. So that application that you said you were making for a little under $1 million now, what is that timeline? In other words, were those costs incurred through which quarter, or the end of July, or the end of June 30th?
Our initial application is based off of actual expenses incurred through July 31st. And staff is working. Yep. Staff is working now on preparing all the documentation for those programs.
Thank you. And obviously then, am I correct that the FEMA Public Assistance Program eligibility for us continues? And so there would be future reimbursement opportunities and applications that we would be making?
We are able to leverage funding through our $4.1 million of Roots to Recovery to meet the local match requirements of the FEMA dollars.
Right. I knew that for the local match. Thank you. My question, COVID-19 related expenses after July 31st, we would be making future applications to FEMA for reimbursement under the Public Assistance Program is my question.
Yes, I apologize for misunderstanding.
No need to apologize.
That's correct. Our FEMA project manager advised us to do quarterly updates to our application for the duration of the event.
Okay, very good. And you'll all be happy to know that I have a 7 o'clock neighborhood meeting I have to think about switching over to. So I'm going to limit my questions. My last couple of questions actually relate to the civil unrest that we've obviously all painfully are well aware of. And I was curious, in your presentation, Laura, in your memo of last Friday, do you have more specifics as to how much money MPD, and I believe the chief is still with us too, so perhaps he might be able to answer the question, Chief Wall, that is, but how much MPD was required to reimburse outside agencies for their mutual aid? When I last asked the question at one of these meetings, JP, Assistant Chief Patterson, wasn't aware if the State Patrol or National Guard or any of the myriad of outside agencies would be seeking any reimbursement from us. Could I have an update on that, please?
We have received, and the chief will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's from one organization that totaled just over $56,000. And that is as of mid-July.
And that's the only one finance department's aware of so far?
I'm seeing that I just am getting an email on this topic. So I'll let the chief answer.
Okay, yeah. Chief Walker.
The only one that I remember seeing is the one Laura referred to of about $50,000. So most of the agencies have not billed us. And certainly state and our local partners here in Dane County, I would not expect to, but many of the outside ones from across the state, it appears, are not going to bill us.
Well, that's great. Can you please identify which agency has billed us?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't know if Laura's got it in front of her. It was I think it was a county sheriff's department, but I don't remember. I'm sorry.
So I just received updated numbers, and these would have been as of July 29th. Oneida sent a bill for $54,000. I'm going to butcher this next one because I'm not from Wisconsin. Langlade submitted an invoice for $1,485 and Minocqua for $11,965.
Thank you. And then the last question I had on the civil unrest is, and obviously we expected a huge hit to the police overtime budget. That was obviously to be expected, and we were bracing for your memo that reported on that. What I actually was a little pleasantly surprised. I was overall pleasantly surprised, of course, by a lot in your memo, but especially in the area of the fire department was obviously a pleasant surprise. And I realize a lot of that is the fact that there isn't going to be a recruit class later this year. But I know that the fire department did have overtime expenditures related to the civil unrest and had assistant chiefs, division chiefs coming in that weren't expected to work, so forth, and organized what they call task forces. And brought reserve ambulances in service and so forth. Do you recall, Laura, how much of an impact the civil unrest had on the fire department overtime budget in the second quarter, so that you're aware of? Was it really nominal, so it wasn't worth mentioning in the memo?
That is, yes, from I think the bigger picture of their overall overtime spending, the change there was not a significant amount. I'm just going to ask Betsy if she has any updated information that she would want to add.
No, I don't, but I can double check with the fire department on that.
Thank you, Betsy. I appreciate that. And thank you, Laura, and all of your staff for the very helpful information. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Have a good neighborhood meeting.
Thank you. I don't think I'm going to say goodbye yet, but I will.
Okay.
Limit my questions in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So then we'll turn to Alder Harrington McKinney.
Madam Mayor, my questions were asked and answered. It was around the mutual fund and those expenditures.
Okay. Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions for Laura on the second quarter projections? Alder Moreland.
Just have a quick question. So regarding the work share, since there's the stipulation of 6 months and the number or the date that's in for a couple of these agencies is September 1st, which is right around the corner, and it doesn't really seem as if COVID is letting up any, what would have to happen in order to extend the work share?
Alder Moreland, do you mean for those that have not yet used up 6 months? Is that your question?
Well, I guess if there are people, can I assume that there are people that have not used their 6 months, or people that have not even been a part of the workshare program that would be asked to participate if others have reached that milestone in order to continue this?
So workshare has been pursued on an agency by agency basis. Mm-hmm. And it's still in that status right now. As I said, there were a few agencies that pursued it both to generate some savings, but also to take advantage of the $600 add-on, which has expired. And then in those business areas, such as the parking utility in Monona Terrace, they opted to put a number of staff on workshare for that maximum 6 months. There is a group in the parking utility that had a shorter amount of time. I imagine that might be reevaluated, but that'll be sort of on an agency by agency basis.
Okay. And then one last question, I believe. I have a lot of stuff written down, but in particular, Streets Division, anticipating 4 snow events when we had, what is that based on?
So it's based off of the number of events that we budget in a year. We also, as it pertains to fourth quarter snow, for the purposes of our projections, we're generally very conservative, mainly for all of the lessons that 2020 is teaching us, and that you have to be prepared for, many unforeseen circumstances. And when it pertains to snow, we have very little control over how much we get and the timing of that. Does it come nicely during a work day, or does it happen, over a holiday weekend? And so the other item as it pertains to fourth quarter snow in particular is that by the time we're incurring those expenditures, any of our tools in our toolbox to deal with making sure that we don't go over budget, we're far too late to really do anything and react. So we are intentionally conservative when we think about the number of events that we need to be prepared for.
So with there being one event in 2019, have we looked back to over maybe a 5 or 10 year period to see how many events took place over that time period? Because it seems as if, at least from the time that I've been in Madison, the snow events have lessened.
So, I think we can go back to a period of 3 years ago where there was snow every weekend in December. There was significant general plow events that happened from Saturday to Sunday that entire month. And so it is highly volatile. I will say that within the last 5 years, we've changed the way that we budget for snow removal to look at a 10-year historical average in terms of snowfall, compared to a previous more conservative approach of looking at those numbers over a 30-year period. And so we were able to reduce the number of events that we budget for annually by sort of shortening the time window at which we look at.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions for Laura on this item? All right, seeing none, then we'll move on to item 25, which is our 2021 operating budget agency request overview.
I'll just share my screen again. So in regards to the operating budget, for 2021, agency requests were due to be submitted on Friday, July 10th. And so we've done an initial review of all of those materials, and all of the agency budget requests for operating are now available on the forward-facing budget website. So before we dive into, exactly what it was that, a summary of what it was that agencies requested, we just want to take a minute and talk again about sort of the overall outlook and what that's based off of. So we are projecting, again, a $25 million deficit for 2021 in the operating budget. That's driven by a projected 11% decline in general fund revenues, a 3% increase in the property tax levy, and general fund expenditures that will grow by about 6.75%. So again, in regards to our revenue projections, that is just like what we're seeing in the first quarter. That is what will continue. That's what is putting the most pressure on the 2021 operating budget. So we are in a situation where in most years we have a situation where our revenue and expenditure growth is out of line, which is why we have a deficit. But what's actually happening this year is that when you take the property tax out of the equation, our general fund revenue sources are actually shrinking. They're getting smaller. And so that's putting even more pressure on having to identify ways that we can balance the budget through expenditure reductions compared to looking at different revenue options. So the $25 million deficit number that we're presenting for the overall gap is actually based off of this worst case scenario model, where those general fund non-property tax levy revenues would be down by $10 million. Now, as we pointed out before, if we're looking at a more optimistic scenario, those revenues would be down $5 million compared to the full 10. Now, in these items, we are getting updated assumptions not only as we move through the rest of 2020 to see, how COVID evolves, but also sort of what revenues are bouncing back quicker. We're also getting updated information around things like the state aid and what that will look like for 2021. So on the expenditure side, we have slowly been updating assumptions around the big expenditure drivers in our budget. And so this table is showing you what we were assuming at cost to continue and what the updated assumption is, and then finally whether or not it's been finalized. So these first two items are wages for our represented employees. So as we prepare for 2021, we are building the budget to include the 3.75% increase that is currently in the police and fire contracts. We have the Metro budget will be built around the recently adopted Teamster contract, which has a 2.5% increase in July. As it pertains to the general municipal employees at cost to continue, we were assuming a 0% increase for them. We still have a 0% in there for planning purposes. However, that decision is not yet finalized. This next item of assumptions is pertaining to our employee benefit costs. So first, in health insurance, we are projecting that the general fund share of the employer payment for health insurance will be up $2.5 million next year. We don't have, we do not currently have rates from ETF, but we know that those will be set next month. Likely, we would have a better sense of that number. In a bit of good news, we were assuming that the WRS, the pension payments, would be up by $1 million. But we did receive the updated rates from ETF. The general municipal employee rates are staying essentially flat, while the public safety or the overall rate is staying essentially flat. There's no increase for the general municipal employees. Public safety employees will be up by 0.1%. So that will realize some savings there. Wage insurance, we were anticipating a $500,000 increase. We know that there was a 5% rate increase that took effect last month. There is an RFP underway to select a new vendor for that benefit for our employees, but that work will not be ready to include in our 2021 budget. And now these next items are sort of extraordinary inflation items. So the first item is the Nakusa Trail facility. So that is the new fleet facility that will open later this fall. Because the fleet facility is an internal service fund, it has to fully recoup its costs from the user agencies. And so city agencies will see the overall fleet rate for 2021 go up by just under about $2 million. However, that final amount will be based off of the borrowing that takes place next month. We also have factored in about $1.1 million of increased costs associated with the Town of Madison attachment. These amounts are based off of the service analysis that agencies completed last winter, where they were projecting the increased costs that they will begin to incur as it pertains as they prepare for the town attachment. These increases that will begin to incur in 2021 are isolated in agencies that have more lead-up work that's necessary to prepare for the attachment. And then finally, we had assumed that we would need to include a major increase in the contingent reserve, assuming a major general fund balance appropriation in 2020. And so that again is just an area that we'll be working through as we develop and finalize the 2021 budget. So items that are not included, and just a note on why these items aren't included, is that we learned more about them after the cost to continue initial projections were developed. And so I will say these are items that as we move through the budget planning process and as we have updated information, we incorporate funding for items like this into the overall budget plan. So these items are really just things that we're learning more and more about as we go through the budget planning process. So the first item will be to fund the Office of the Independent Police Monitor in accordance with what is being working its way through the approval process right now. The other item of note is pertaining to the public safety radio program. So this is something that was a major capital project back in 2015, 2016 to upgrade all of the public safety radios, but not these are the radios that are also utilized by our public works department as part of their work. We had implemented that program as an out-of-the-box hardware purchase, but now, just like we're seeing with other things, the industry is evolving into an annual software subscription model, which is meaning that instead of incurring $15 million every 10 years to upgrade the program, we'll be incurring an annual subscription cost to maintain that asset. So there's a couple of different service levels that we can fund that. And so we're working through that as well. Moving on to summarizing the agency requests. So again, the mayor's guidance asked agencies to prepare a base budget that was in line with their cost to continue target, as well as for general and library fund agencies, a 5% reduction scenario. So in 3 cases, we saw general fund agencies that proposed sort of programmatic changes or service level changes within their base amount. So the Community Development Division proposed creation of a COVID Recovery Flex Fund that would be used to target families as they are working to adjust to sort of the new normal and the economic fallout of COVID-19. They've also proposed reallocating existing childcare funds to increase center support and to implement some changes to the tuition assistance program. They are proposing to change the way the older adult program works to move money into focusing more on case management, and then repurposing some staff time to be focused specifically on eviction prevention. The fire department has put forth a proposal to increase the city's ambulance fee as a way to fund the creation of a 9th ambulance. And so as they've proposed it, the increase would be would generate about $1.2 million of new revenue that would be used to create 12 new positions in the fire department to staff that 9th ambulance. And then finally, the library put forth a plan to eliminate the library fines program. And so they put forth a series of vacant position and program cost reductions, including the closure of a branch, in order to accommodate eliminating the library fine program, and then also to adjust various revenue items in their budget to be in line with their current revenues that we're seeing during COVID. So moving on to the proposed savings that agencies requested. So in total, the general fund agencies submitted 96 different ideas for savings, totaling about $13.5 million. As you can see in this pie chart here, the savings from 5 agencies represent 75% of the proposed reductions. And what we did was we looked at the reductions that agencies put forth, and we analyzed them both to determine if they were ongoing savings versus one time. So in this chart here, this lighter blue line represents the ongoing savings, which total about $12.1 million compared to $1.3 million of one time. And then we also categorize the savings into different types. Efficiencies, revenue increases, and service cuts. So when we look at this, about $3.1 million of the proposals that we received from agencies were efficiencies. So ways that they can change the way that they're doing their business or allocating their resources in a way to make the overall, in order to continue the current level of service that they're providing, potentially with fewer resources. Now moving on to the enterprise agencies. So for Monona Terrace and the room tax, the room tax revenue is projected to be $14.6 million in 2021, down from $19.5 million in 2020. So in those numbers, we assume, I realized that my slide is on the wrong one. There we go. We assume that the subsidies to the zoo in Oldbrook, those would need to be fully funded by the general fund. A decrease to the Destination Madison and Overture contracts, and then a reduction to Monona Terrace's operating subsidy that they would realize through holding vacant positions open and scaling back their hourly staffing. In Metro's proposal, they have assumed that they would continue at a reduced service level, that 85% target that they're working towards throughout 2021. They would assume utilizing the remaining balance of their CARES Act allocation in order to ensure that the general fund subsidy amount is consistent with cost to continue. In their proposal, they've also outlined a plan to convert 16 vacant transit operator positions to bus cleaners. And that is in the attempt, or that is to ensure high levels of a more robust cleaning plan on all the buses. In the case of the parking utility, there are no major expenditure reductions. However, they do anticipate that they will continue to see lower revenue levels throughout 2021, which would require them to use $6 million of their fund balance in 2021 in order to continue service without scaling back expenditures. Sewer and storm have proposed, or the sewer utility has proposed a 10% rate increase. This is driven by debt service and projected charges from the sewage district. The stormwater, their proposed budget would result in a 12% rate increase. This is driven by the watershed studies and then increase in debt service related to recent capital spending in the stormwater utility. On the waterfront, talking a lot about their new rate increase. On the revenue side, their proposed budget annualizes the rate increase that just went into effect, but does not plan for an additional 2021 rate increase. The golf enterprise reflects again maintaining current level of service. There's no sort of proposed change resulting from any potential recommendations from the task force. And then finally, public health includes the proposal to annualize the funding for the 8 new positions that were created with CARES Act funding. So just to kind of wrap us up in terms of our next steps. So we're currently in a process where we're working through agency briefings with the mayor's office. And so we've had 2 of those 4 sessions. Those will wrap up this week. The remainder of August and September will be spent on developing the executive budget. A lot of that will be driven by updated information that we get as those assumptions are finalized, particularly items that we learn about from other partners, including the state through ETF and whatnot. And then finally, the executive budget will be introduced at council on October 6th, and then you can see here what that schedule looks like. So the executive budget, again, gets introduced on the 6th. The Finance Committee hearings will take place on October 12th and 13th. The votes on amendments to the at Finance Committee will take place on October 26th, and then council adoption of the budget will take place from November 10th to 13th.
Thank you, Laura. So before we get into questions, let me just reiterate to not just Finance Committee alders, but to the entire council that I'm eager to hear your input, your thoughts as I develop the executive budgets. Thoughts on the capital budget are urgent. So if you did have items that you wanted to bring to my attention, please do so really within the next couple of days, if at all possible. And then the operating budget, as you could see from Laura's schedule, we're still working our way through the agency requests and submissions. So that's slightly less urgent, but equally eager to have your input as early as possible, particularly given what Laura just laid out and the hard choices that we're going to have to make in terms of spending reductions. So I just want to extend again that I really do want to hear from you what your priorities are as we go into this tough budget. Are there questions for Laura on this? Alder Moreland.
Just a couple. On the Metro, where you say that they plan to convert 16 vacant transit operators, and I'm assuming those are bus drivers?
That's correct. Yep.
To bus cleaners? Mm-hmm. I would imagine that would be a totally different work class, a work group. Is that correct?
They are both Teamster positions, but yes, they're classified differently. Yep.
Okay. So did they anticipate? Well, I guess they can't anticipate, but I guess I'm assuming if I were a bus driver, would I want to become a bus cleaner?
So the positions are not filled.
They're not filled currently.
Yeah. They're just vacant positions.
Okay.
Yeah, it would not impact any current employees.
Okay, and the other question is on the golf, and I've not looked at the recommendations of the golf task force, and I will do so going into budget season. But what is the projected deficit? Because this particular line item has been operating in the deficit for a few years, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So their annual deficits have varied year over year, depending upon largely weather and how early they've been able to open the courses, and then how long they've been able to keep them open. So, based off of the very they put forth a very optimistic revenue package that results in a balanced budget. I would say based off the second quarter numbers, the projected deficit for golf was about $360,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to add to that, Alder Moreland, golf is also in a deficit to the general fund from prior years of about $1.3 million.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought, but okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Laura, you gave a cost estimate for the Police Civilian Oversight Board. What about and it said the language was funding support for individual bringing complaints before the PFC. Oh, you didn't give a estimated cost of the Police Civilian Oversight Board.
I'll turn it to Dave. So our estimate is about $400,000 annually for that office. $200,000 of that is currently budgeted in the base budget.
So, Alder Harrington McKinney, this was on today's agenda, and there are materials attached to the agenda items if you want to read more closely. But the total estimated cost on an annual basis is about $482,000, as Laura said. The legal representation, sort of rough estimate that is a part of that $482,000 is $50,000, and that would be to provide some, in effect, payment for individuals who might bring claims before the Police and Fire Commission, and then it would be reimbursed up to a certain amount.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
Laura, did you say that the Metro was going to be operating at 85% and through the remainder of this year? And how does that impact some of the transit routes?
So that is their goal, is to get back to 85%.
To get back to, okay.
To get back up to that. In regards to how that's being operationalized on the specific routes, I would actually defer that to Metro and transportation staff.
Okay, I'll talk to them offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney.
One additional question. It was about the ambulance, and the projected income was $1.2 million for new revenue. And so what is the cost to the user? I see the projection in terms of the revenue generated, but do you have a cost to the user, an estimated cost, what it is now and what it will be proposed to be?
I believe Dave has that information.
Well, someone does. The current ambulance fee is, I believe, a little over $1,000 per conveyance. And what fire is proposing is a $25 to $75 increase in that fee. Laura and the budget team will be sort of checking, I think, those assumptions. One thing to keep in mind with ambulance fee increases is that for each dollar that it's increased, we realize less than 50% of that increase, because Medicaid and Medicare only reimburse a fixed amount. They don't reimburse the total amount that is charged. Most other individuals pay through private insurance, but that's a share of the overall population that is that takes advantage or uses ambulance services or has to use ambulance services. And then, as you know, there's also a waiver program for individuals below a certain income. So all of that tends to degrade the amount of revenues raised per dollar, per $10 that's added to the ambulance fee. I believe that's the current fee that individuals pay right now. Most individuals don't pay that full amount. Either they're covered by Medicaid, Medicare, or they're covered by their private insurance. Some do pay full out of pocket, but that's a small share of the overall total.
So a follow-up question is that the worst case scenario when there is a large conveyance bill and these other entities don't apply, what is the recourse? I'm kind of asking a rhetorical question. I mean, is there, what is the recourse and how are those shortfalls in revenue reported?
Alder Harrington McKay, I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but I'll take a stab at it. We try to make those estimates for sort of each dollar of increase to reflect that mix of payors, as I described, so that we avoid any sort of shortfalls in revenues, at least on the city revenue side. And if your question is about how individuals pay, as I said, if they have to pay out of pocket and meet our hardship criteria, they can have the ambulance fee waived.
Okay, yes, that latter was my question, really. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions on the 2021 agency request overview? Alder Vidar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's Mr. Schminicki. This is more of a general question. It's around our rating. That every year that's kind of part of our considerations in our budgeting process, right? To make sure that we maintain certain criteria so that we maintain our AAA rating. Has there been any conversation nationally about how the agencies may change their rating criteria given the hardship in which we and other municipalities are in? I'm just going to assume that they don't want to apply the same criteria than pre-COVID because everybody most likely would not. Nobody would meet their criteria anymore.
Yes, the rating agencies are staying fully abreast of what's happening in the economy and how state and local governments are reacting to that. Just to give you an example, one of the rating agencies just recently put the United States on a negative outlook. So those are some things that the rating agency might look at. What they'll be looking at to maintain rating, in sort of my estimation, would be the extent to which, if you have to use fund balance, you have a plan to restore it.
Got it.
And that you are at least finding a balance between any sort of one-time revenues or cuts versus matching up your cuts and revenues to reflect what you think the duration of the economic impacts are going to be.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Madam Mayor? So is that part of our consideration within how you're thinking about the executive budget? Is that, some of the criteria and standards we've used, which have been very high for us because we wanted to maintain that really high rating, just we can't apply that? And so what are the boundaries that we are using so that, again, we still meet the criteria that you were just mentioning that they're looking for?
I think I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mayor.
Well, but Alder, I think that's. I imagine Dave will say the same thing. I think that's. We're looking at, in terms of fund balance, having an approach that would allow us to use fund balance, but with a plan to replenish. I don't want to put the city long term. Either from the rating agency point of view or just frankly from the fund balance point of view of weakening that position too much. And then, I think one of the things that I'm really looking at in all of the agency proposals is whether the savings or revenue are one time and making sure that we're not taking advantage of too many one-time options. Because that will just make our job harder again next year. So really trying to balance, it obviously requires a crystal ball, but what do we think is going to recover in 22 or 23 in terms of revenue, and how that we might be able to take advantage of some one-time opportunities to balance that projected recovery, but certainly we're not going to be able to solve this through only one-time opportunities. Dave, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
No, I think you covered it quite well, Mayor, and it's really about having a plan. I think the rating agencies recognize that many states and local governments will have to dip into reserve funds. Many recognize that they'll have to use a number of creative approaches, but it's that idea that they recognize, okay, there's a sense of how that's going to be returned to that level of stability that the government, state or local government had before we went into this. So I think those are the things we'll be keeping in mind. The other factor that we have perhaps a little less control over will be what the state of our local and regional economy is vis-a-vis the rest of the other issuers like ourselves. So that'll have a long-term effect as well, and probably some of the reliance that we've had in terms of our stable economy to some extent might be somewhat at risk this time around, just given that the extent of how the pandemic and those effects have on things like the University of Wisconsin that we've always pointed to as a place of stability, some of our biotech areas and things like that.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions for Dave or Laura? All right. Seeing none, then I'll just remind you all and the viewing public that those agency requests are now available on the website. And again, welcome input, thoughts, feedback as we put together the executive budget. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Alder Moreland.
I move to adjourn.
Alder Carter.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing no objection, then we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.